God.
Mission sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
It's astonishing.
Yeah, you better. Yeah, you better. Yeah, you better.
Three, 2, 1, action.
Hello everyone, welcome to ProAV. Thank you very much for joining this. I'm joined once again by Luke. How are you, Luke?
I'm very well, thank you, mate. Very well.
So this is the second in a little series we've been doing, looking at different sort of profile. It's really hard to profile and the industry at the moment, but this is one of the clear ones because there's nothing quite like wildlife.
Correct.
You know, whether you're doing stills or video, shooting wildlife, capturing wildlife. Well, you shouldn't really use either of those words, should you? You know, photographing and capturing photographs and photos and video of wildlife. There's sort of nothing really like it.
No,
it's so unique.
Yeah, it's such a specialism. You find a lot of people this day and age, you know, they shoot a broad spectrum of content, you know, they shoot across the board and they need a camera that gives them the ability to do that. Like wildlife is wildlife. And if you're a dedicated wildlife shooter, you need dedicated equipment to do that. So this is, you know, part of the series that we're doing. This one's really definitive and there's real definitive tools that allow you to go out there and produce the best quality work.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So part of this, I mean, this is very informal. Anyone watching it, this is literally just us chatting backwards and forwards about different pieces of kit. We've got a little live demo. I'm joined by a great. Did you say this was?
We've not named him yet, so maybe in the comments we can come up with some name suggestions. So we've not given him a name yet. So it would be good to come away with a name at the end of the day.
Name this bird competition and they'll get a free A9.
I'm not saying anything on that.
Maybe not. Just street cred, I guess. So we'll do a live little demo with that in terms of some of the wildlife because it all surprisingly works surprisingly well on a fake bird.
Yeah.
The tech is pretty
we
clever.
We say that now. Now we've gone live. You know, the live demons will
Liam
come
says
up
it's a
with us.
blue tit. He might have been wrong.
Liam is the expert.
Liam is the resident ProAV expert.
Yeah. And I think on this as well, whilst we talk about resident experts and experts in the field, I'm no wildlife photographer.
Nor am I.
I have taken, you know, numerous bits of feedback and spoken at great lengths with lots of different wildlife photographers, and this is kind of the input they've given me, and it helps steer this conversation. You know, I have done some wildlife workshops, but they're nowhere near what it's like, you know, going out for a few days in the wild and taking kit with you and having batteries and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'm not going to pass myself off as a wildlife expert photographer, but we are surrounded by, you know, incredibly talented people that have given us feedback. We can say, okay, we know this does that, and that's why they choose it. So
yeah, absolutely fantastic. So as we go, anyone watching this, leave sort of feedback, questions, discussion topics, join the conversation in the live chat. I can bring any of it up as we go, like I can bring up Liam clarifying right there.
That clarified the bird and also that I'm not an expert. There
Exactly.
we go.
And let us know if people watching this, let us know if you are wildlife photographers, let us know what kit you're using, let us share some of your work, join the conversation. So where do we start, Luke, do you reckon?
I think starting talking about, like, you know, what is wildlife photography? It's such a broad subject, you know, and there's all different levels. It's so scalable.
Yep.
So you could be, you know, in terms of what we're going to cover here, we're going to cover who, why, some technology lineups, and then what we think is the best configurations based on, you know, what end of the spectrum you're sat at. So for instance, if we look at like who, you get hobbyists.
Yeah.
Now a hobbyist could be, you know, someone who has got a bird feeder in their garden and likes to take photos of the blue tits that are flying out of their garden, and that's a hobbyist for them. They then might progress from there and decide to go to the local park and take some photos of birds in the wild. You know, the skill levels up. So the hobbyist is really broad, and that's not just for birds. You could be like into otters, you could be into insects. It's really, really broad, and it's a great entry point for photography. Like, it's fantastic, and there's some really good kit out there that allows you to be a hobbyist taking photos of any given animal you want. Then we have professionals, and professionals would be people that document or shoot wildlife in video or stills capacity for a living. So, you know, people that sell their prints or they work for documentaries and things like that. So, you know, we've got Will Baron Lucas there, who's one of our ambassadors. This guy spends, you know, long periods of time out in the wild documenting all sorts of animals, from birds to lions to elephants. He's just come back from a project in the Congo shooting gorillas, which is incredible, you know. So again, ticks that wildlife box, and his kit's going to be very different from the hobbyist kit, but there will be synergies across the board there. And then we've got pet owners. So we talk about wildlife. We often think about like being out in the wild and things like that. We also have people that love their animals and are into taking photos of their animals. And there's technologies in these cameras that allow you to do that really well. So for instance, the AI autofocus technology around animals, you know, if you're shooting a bird, a dog, a cat, a bird, there is the ability to define, and we'll show you a little bit later, which one of those is a priority in terms of focusing on. So yeah, real broad spectrum. So yeah, pet owners could fall into like lifestyle category or wildlife. It kind of flirts between the two. Sure. So yeah, so that's kind of a starting point. I recently come back from Bird Fair, and really, first time I'd ever done it, really incredible experience and a real eye-opener to the lengths that people go to document things that they're into, such as these birds. So, you know, people will go and pay for a holiday in Costa Rica, you know, we're talking nearly tens of thousands of pounds. So you're going away into remote locations, and these are still deemed as hobbyists. They're going away to remote locations to find a specific bird that spikes their interest. Now, if you go and find that bird, naturally, what are you going to want to do? You're going to want to savor that moment. So you're going to want a camera to be able to do it. So I was really surprised at Bird Fair, you know, how important a camera is to these people.
I mean, the amount of crossover between hobbyists and professionals here is crazy. You know, when you describe hobbyists, you sort of picture an RX camera like you've got in front of you, or that kind of thing. I was once filming a camera review down by one of the nature reserves around here, just the lakes. It was Ricky Aquadrome or somewhere like that. And a guy came up to me with an A1 around his neck, and it was a 200 or 400 mil or something, some big white Sony lens, and just wanted to know what we were doing, wanted to ask about the camera, have a little chat, and all this. And so I asked, I said, blame you, what are you doing? What do you work for? Are you a journalist? What's going on? He's like, oh, no, I'm retired. This is just my hobby. This is what I do. You know, I didn't buy myself a camper van to go around the country. I bought myself an A1 and a fancy lens, and I take photos of birds. It's amazing.
It is amazing. It's incredible, and that's similar to you. That's the thing that struck me at Bird Fair. You know, being the first time I'd ever gone there, you know, seeing the amount of hobbyists that are using things like the A1, the A7R Mark V, the A9 Mark III. Like those are what we would deem as like professional cameras. You know, these are the tools that professionals would take out to go into the field to document, you know, wildlife, and these people are using them. And the thing is, normally with professional tools, they can be complex. Like, it's great to see these hobbyists, you know, retired, I don't know his name, let's call him Jeff, down the local ponds taking photos with his A1. Like, that's great that the technology is usable across sort of professional users and hobbyists. But yeah, a real eye opener there. And then there's also you know, that's talking about birds, there's insects. It really does expand, you know, there's this huge. You think of an animal and there's an opportunity to photograph it, which is really interesting. So in terms of like the audience that we cover, that covers it broadly, and there's huge overlaps, like we say. But what I wanted to do is kind of go into the technologies that allow to overlap and kind of give demonstrations of those. But before doing that, I wanted to give a couple of examples of some photographers that we work with and we know of and have relationships with, that use our kit, and talk about what they use and why they use them and things like that. So the first one is Dustin. So I met Dustin at Global Bird Fair. So Dustin is a hobbyist with 144,000 Instagram followers, which is incredible. And he basically shoots birds of paradise. So his passion is birds of paradise. So he will go out to remote locations and find
in the wild birds of paradise.
In the wild, yeah. You can't get these things. There's some in captivity, but he wants to catch them in the wild. So at the moment, his current loadout is, you know, he started off with, I think it was like the R4, something along those lines. Then he added the A1, and he's now moved to the A9 Mark III. The reason being is a lot of these birds have really interesting mating rituals, and they move very fast. So he wanted a camera that had the speed, and he also shoots hummingbirds and things like that. But the lengths that this guy goes to as a hobbyist, let's kind of like keep that in mind. So he was once in a location, and he thought to himself, this would be perfect for a given species of bird. And he recommended someone to pot some specific plants there and move some stuff around and do some landscaping, and said, you know, eventually the birds will come once the environment is right. So he went away, came back a year later, no birds, sort of thing, and the environment was then right. Then the birds moved in. So, like, the guy is thinking years ahead in terms of projects to be able to shoot this given species of birds, and will create the ecosystem to allow it to happen, and then go and shoot it as a hobbyist. Like, that's really incredible. And using the A9 Mark III, which is So his current loadout is the A9 Mark III with the 300 2.8. So that's a professional loadout. That's not a, it's kind of...
Certainly is.
It's not a bridge camera, but it really gives you some great options. So yeah, Dustin is a great example. Then we have people like Robert Fuller. So Robert Fuller is someone that we worked with previously, and he's what we would deem as a professional wildlife photographer. So, he will build kits and rigs and things like that and spend a long time out and shooting stuff and shoot some incredible photos. So and again, another, he's professional. His loadout is the A1, so he chooses the A1 at the minute. And the reason being is this is like a controversial kind of subject. Is like, would you go A9 Mark III or A1? That's the battle at the minute.
Kind of the big discussion of this topic, isn't it? So
he decides on the A1 largely because a lot of the time he's shooting in really remote locations, quite far from subject, and he doesn't want to be noticed. The thing with wildlife is if they know you're there, you can't shoot them. So distance is your friend. When you've got distance and you're shooting on a digital format platform, like resolution is absolutely key. So having a camera that shoots at 50 megapixels gives him the ability to use a long range lens, still be able to crop in and still keep fidelity in that file. So for him, the A1 is the option to go for. Other people, I'd say, the A9, that's their thing, is the lower megapixels is the reason they wouldn't make that transition from the A1 to the A9. So it is swings and roundabouts. You either do the work in the lens or you do the work in the megapixels, or find a sweet spot between the two, is what I'm kind of finding out. What would you do if you was in that situation?
I don't know, because the reason to go A9 is because of the speed of it. I don't think the global shutter's going to come into it a huge amount here. Birds aren't moving that quickly unless they're in flight and you're panning with them, in which case it would. But that's a shot. If you're pulling that one off, that's impressive. Side to side, anyway, not at the camera.
So funny you say that. There is a really interesting group on Facebook that I found, and it's basically A9 Mark III shooters, it's called. So if you go on Facebook, type in A9 Mark III shooters, and some of the images on there, one that was posted yesterday, I believe it was someone firing a gun and the bullet being seen firing from the gun, which is incredible. Like, it just indicates the speed that it's capable of. So for animals, a fast flying animal like a hummingbird or something, of course that makes perfect sense. So I interrupted you. You were justifying your answer.
What was I justifying? So a lot of the reasons for going the A9 route would be the speed of the autofocus, the technology inside it, the AI stuff for the subject recognition, and how fast frames a second it can do. The A9 can already do, and the
30.
A1 can already do a lot of that, particularly the frames a second.
Correct.
It's one of the highest frames a second cameras with the highest, that kind of crazy high resolution on the market. But I think it came out before this wave of AI chips and subject, right? So
correct.
It's missing some of those.
So not as advanced
features
in terms of the AI features that you would get on the Mark III and stuff, but
so
still.
I think I'd lean towards A9 Mark III right now, just because those are, we'll see them in a second, but they are very, very good. But I can absolutely see the resolution
place for both of them. There is, like you say, there is space for both of them currently, and from the conversations we've had with I've had with wildlife photographers and stuff, is it's either A1 or A9 Mark III is like the combination between the two, or they're running both bodies. They've got two bodies. You're like, okay, that's cool, best of both worlds. But on that point, one of the conversations we have a lot is, why doesn't the A9 III shoot higher? Why doesn't it have a higher megapixel sensor? No matter what you do, people will always want more. It's one of those things. And when you think about the sheer amount of processing power you have to do, so 24 megapixels at 120 frames, it's a lot of data being run for a very small
global shutter. That's going to be the main limitation, is there's not that many global shutter sensors, so the sensor has to be developed to be a global shutter, to read out incredibly quickly and to be that high resolution.
So covering that. So that's Robert, and then the last one would be Jessica McGovern. So she would fall into like the pet photography. So she's quite unique in her. So she's a dog trainer and a photographer, and she does workshops in training you to train your dog to then take photos of your dog, because there's a huge industry in people taking photos. Less and less people are having children nowadays, so they go and get a dog. They love their dog like they love their child. What are you going to do? It's just like that trip to Costa Rica. I want to document this.
Children, you're going to have, on the wall, you have your kids and your dog.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, there's a huge pool, and it doesn't have to just be dogs. It could be cats. It could be whatever. So, and again, like the technologies that are harboured between some of these products are great across all of these. You know, so you could easily choose across all of those fields, like what Dustin does, what Robert does, what Jess does. The A7 Mark IV could easily shoot all of those.
Yes.
You could put that camera in that, and it would do all of them. If you're looking at the real specialist stuff that Dustin's doing, then the A9 Mark III is going to be for him, you know.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the more specialist stuff that Robert's doing, the A1 then becomes for him. So it's kind of, yeah.
While we're talking about the range, we've had a little bit of feedback from Shahab, who, fairly critical feedback, but says both wildlife and Sony shoot it here, and I must say I'm very disappointed Sony's decided to dedicate over 10 frames a second to high-priced sports cameras only. Every other brand's giving you 20 frames a second with their entry-level, I'm not sure they are. Sony's not bothering to update older models to give them some of the new possible features. I think on that, I mean, what are some of the cheaper A760, 700?
Yeah.
Springs to
we
mind
have here,
instantly.
yeah. So this chap here. So you know, in terms of like more affordable, you know, we've talked about some high
A1's going to set
products.
you back.
It's a fair bit of money, but if we're looking at something that's more affordable, more accessible, the 6700 is a great product for that. Has, you know, the majority of the AI autofocus technologies that you have in the A9 Mark III, the R5, all that sort of stuff. So you're not getting less tech. You know, you're obviously getting the, you know, so I don't know if people know, like you have a smaller sensor in there, so we call it an APS-C sensor as opposed to a full frame sensor. So having a smaller sensor, of course, brings down the sort of the price tag of the product. But the 6700 would be a great option. The great thing with that is you then have the crop factor on sensors and lenses and stuff. So sometimes you get a bit more range from the same camera and lens, which is good. So yeah, more affordable. If, for instance, neither of those are affordable, then your entry point would still be something like a bridge camera, you know, and that's going to give you the range. There isn't another product this size that gives you so much range in terms of your focus and stuff. And also another way to answer that question is, when a camera comes to market or any given better technology, that, you know, when it's launched, that's the pinnacle of that technology right there at that given time.
And frames a second is very linked to hardware.
Correct.
Like, that's linked to processors, it's linked to the sensor,
That's
it's
as
linked
best
to
it can
everything.
be at that given time. So then to retrofit technology and updates into a product as good as it is at that point in time is really difficult to do. And you see that across all industries. You see it across TV, you see it across audio, so many. So to be able to then say, okay, right, you know, this was the best it was at that point there. We've really peaked and capped out as much as we can. Oh, wait, we've got this new technology. We can't do that. We've taken that as far as it can go. So there might be some software changes, but hardware you physically can't change. And frame rate is a hardware thing. Until you start talking about things like global shutter, then it no longer is a physical hardware thing. It becomes more of a digital thing, which there are options outside of that. So it's difficult to retrofit new features into older hardware. You see it in cars, you see it across all others. That's probably the kind of how I would answer that question.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. I think if you're holding out for a camera that you've currently got that's got 7 frames a second or something to be upped to 20, it's just not going to happen. But I think there is a valid point there in terms of some of this high frames a second stuff is great for the more hobbyist end of it, and like we said, some are buying out an A1, but we shouldn't expect them to go out and fork 10 grand on cameras. And so having it in the A6700, I mean, the A6700 on our site right now, I just checked, is £1,410 ink fat, which is a fantastic price for what that thing can do.
For what this does, that is an incredible bit of camera. It's
also a really nice camera to shoot with because it's tiny.
Tiny.
It's brilliant to take around with you.
The shape of it is great as well. Makes it really easy to pug away. You know, in terms of a camera kit bag, it's a nice rectangular design, so it's very easy to load out with. If I was embarking on my photographic journey, or I was a student, or I was just starting out, and you know, I cut like my £1,500 sort of budget, which is a good budget for a camera. The 6700 would be where I would start. I'd say, okay, right, this would be the start.
Do you remember what the max frames a second is? Is it 11?
I think it is 11.
So yeah, enough for a lot of this stuff. It could be higher. And I think that would be great to see.
Yeah.
But 11 is still good. 11 is very good.
Yeah, and I think the other thing on technology of frame, like shutter and all the rest of it. So this is my opinion again. Since the pioneering of the digital camera, the shutter has always been the linchpin, isn't it? That's the mechanical component of a digital. A digital bit of hardware. Like, it's always been the bit that slows it down. So it's always going to be the bit that's going to cap you. It's always going to be the bit that's going to slow you down, sort of thing, until that change. And global shutter is naturally the trajectory of digital cameras. That whole sensor being exposed, the whole image being taken, without that interlacing process of the shutter. And we're now kind of reaching there. Eventually, we know all these new technology improvements trickle down. We've seen it. We see it across all technologies, particularly Sony. It's really great. These new pioneering technologies, you then see them, in a mid-range product a few years later, or in a lower product like a few years later, which is great. So, even if you take things like the ZV range, we spoke about those previously. They've got some fantastic features that you would find in some of these higher-end cameras.
And I think the bit that Sony have been able to put across those is the subject tracking, the AI side of it, and they have put that across the entire lineup. Something that is so closely linked to hardware, like frames per second, is going to be, more expensive hardware is going to be able to do that better than the mid-range hardware.
Correct. Nice.
Cool. So let's chat a little bit more about some of the work and the situations that people like this find themselves in. Because I think the bit that strikes me after having dabbled in it about wildlife is the amount of waiting, and then when something happens, how unbelievably quickly you have to there is no time to wait for anything, and yet it feels like all you do is wait.
It's so very true. From the wildlife photographers I've spoken to, they will explain a scenario where they've gone out and they're in a hide. We're not talking a few hours. We're not talking about, I'm into cycling. I'll pop out of the house for a few hours and that's my hobby ticked off. These guys are out for potentially days, it's incredible. And then, like you say, when it's on, it needs to be on, and you need 100% reliance in that technology. So the camera needs to be quick, otherwise you miss that shot. And you imagine you've camped out for 48 hours waiting for this one given moment, and it happens, and you miss it,
and you missed it.
So on that, it's almost like you cued this perfectly for this. So one of the
I'm a professional.
I know you didn't. This is me capitalising as a marketeer and a salesman. So on that subject, on the A9 Mark III, we have a new technology which is called pre-capture.
Yes.
And that pre-capture gives you the option to record up to a second before you push that button. So you have a second play before you even push that button, where it will automatically be like logging and taking photos of that, which is incredible. So you're then reducing the probability of missing that shot, because the camera is already doing some of the work for you. It can't do a longer period than that because it has to keep on rewriting that data, so there's limitations to it.
The camera has to be pointed in the right way in the beginning, obviously.
It can't do it all for you. Exactly. It can't do it all for you just yet, but I'd imagine that AI will solve that problem at some point. But yeah, so it has this pre-capture function, which is incredible. Like, it's a really incredible feature. And I know you went to Turkey to see the launch of the A9 Mark III and got to play with it. What's your opinions?
Oh, it's fantastic for that. I mean, we've had it in the video world for a while because, of course, in video it's very, very useful. But it's really quite high-end cameras that are able to do that, because the amount of memory that the camera has to be able to do. Because you think about what it's actually doing, it is writing all of the time and then throwing it away.
Yeah.
And so the buffer and the internal sort of storage, flash storage that is needed to capture that at the kind of resolutions and quality that we used to be able to do it in 1080p video, but bumping up to higher resolutions and bumping up to the level that stills are now capable of doing, it's really impressive on a hardware front. And from a practicality point, it is just amazing. Because I think in wildlife, from my experience as someone who's been a very dabbled, rather average wildlife photographer, when I'm missing shots, it's more because it's happening over there, quick whip pan to it and go. And so pre-capture, if I hit that, it's also getting that little bit before, which you might just get a little bit of it captured in the corner or whatever, which might mean that it really does make a difference.
Huge difference. And they call it in the wildlife, they call it your hit rate. That's what they sort of, you talk to them and they're talking about their hit rate, and they talk about when they first started, my hit rate was horrendous, now my hit rate is this, and talking about hit rates, I can only refer that to like Call of Duty as a child. I'm sort of like, this is the language that they're talking in and stuff. So so it's interesting, and a lot of them do talk about the hit rates that they have with Sony cameras is a lot higher. Like they've increased that, particularly for the professional guys, which is great. They increase that hit rate. It's their profession. I think with any given photography genre, if you can create your work in shorter time as possible to the quality that people expect, that's how you earn more money and have a better living as a creative.
And if we go back to the amount of waiting and then it happens so quickly, if you call that an opportunity, say when they're out there for a day, they might get 10 opportunities. Yeah. If you're missing 5 of those, how frustrating is that?
And it's not a cheap venture, is it? It's not cheap financially in terms of having the kit to be able to go out into the field to do it, but it's also not cheap on your time and your being out there, uncomfortable, doing stuff, kind of waiting for this. So yeah, all takes
think about it in
toll.
terms of a day rate. How many photos as a pet photographer or as a wedding photographer do you end up with after one day of work and your day rate for that day? Compare that to wildlife, and it goes. So your time is valuable in wildlife.
Super valuable. So yeah, so the going back to it, the pre-capture is a new technology, and again, it's a flagship product. It's not available on everything. It will eventually, I would imagine, start to filter down and trickle down, but it is, a new technology that allows us to kind of reduce that failure rate or that limited hit rate. So yeah, we have got some technologies around that. So people like Dustin will go out for days on end to find it. Same with Robert. He will find himself in, and camping outside, being outside, you've got to deal with the conditions. You need a body that's like weather resistance and sealed and stuff like that. So the A1 is great for that. The A9 Mark III is great for that. You might find some of the, lower, like if you sort of, a ZV-1 is not going to hold up to being out in the wildlife for a few days sort of thing. So you have to have the right tools for the given environment. So
I quite often see them in the middle of a river or something like that with the camera about this far above. When you look at it and go, it only takes like one boat to go past you or something.
It's a game over. It's a game over on that one.
Yeah, weather sealing's important.
Super important. And then Jess is at the other end of the spectrum where she's doing stuff in studio environments or she's out on location, much more controlled. And these other two people are documenting. They're taking stuff as it is, and taking photo. Whereas Jess is kind of building a scene. She's producing it, so it's being set up and the dog's trained to do a specific thing. So a bit more time around that, but she still needs equipment that's reliable because children and animals don't work with them.
And how game-changing was it in just normal portrait photography when we came along with things like eye tracking, autofocus and stuff? And all these wildlife things still relate to that. She's just taking portraits.
Exactly.
And so it's that same moment, but for a pet photographer.
Exactly.
Than it is for
the
a
eye
human.
needs to be sharp. Everything needs to be sharp. It's like, okay, yeah, the subject matter has changed, but what we're trying to create still has to be of a high enough quality. And we'll show some of that as well, like the eye technology, autofocus stuff. We'll show that in a moment. But that.
George put an interesting comment saying, "Hey guys, hope you're well. Looks like pre-shooting could be really useful for wildlife, but also for events," which is absolutely true.
Fair point.
Anything that you're trying to capture a moment, like for sports, it's just as relevant for sports as it is for wildlife, for example. And I'd love to know Liam's thoughts on this for wildlife as well. We actually talked about getting Liam on this thing, which in hindsight, we really should have done.
I'll go and bring Liam in because he probably knows more about wildlife photography than I do.
We should let Liam do it. Let's definitely do some stuff like this with Liam as well. Anyone who doesn't know what on earth we're talking about, Liam is... He's been one of our sales account managers for a long time. He's just transitioned into a more technical role, doing more of the demos and looking after our equipment and all that kind of stuff. But he is a very talented wildlife. He sort of sits in that bridge between hobbyist and professional as well. Yeah. He shot the lovely owl that's behind you there, which I'm not sure you can actually see in your frame there. You can see just the bottom there in the wide. We've got a few of his pieces of work up around here, but that's his hobby. It's doing exactly this.
Exactly, yeah. And he, great understanding. And again, he's one of the people that we talk to and speak to, and he'll explain what he's doing and, kind of give us insights of why he's using that given kit and stuff. So, it's great to be surrounded by that. But, ask Liam the question because he'll have a better answer
absolutely
than us.
So, Shabab has come back And he prefaces in this, I might be too grumpy. He says, and while focusing on video, why no waveform or false colour in any consumer level camera other than the cinema line? I might be too grumpy, but my A7 Mark IV has got almost nothing through firmware updates while it's the best selling camera. I think that there's a point in that it's the best selling camera. In terms of the frames per second, that definitely, that is a camera that was pushed to its max when it was launched.
Yeah.
I do agree with him on the waveform of false colour though, which is well documented across a lot of my videos on the internet.
Yeah, I'm not going to say yes we should do this or yes we shouldn't do that.
Course not.
With my Sony cap on, the reason the things exist is obviously to do with like our long-term strategies and how we divvy up our products in the market and stuff. So yeah, kind of as a front man right here, I can only apologise that we can't make a product that ticks everyone's box at every all the time. There'll always be stuff.
Everyone's got strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly.
George has also said pre-capture could be so useful in pretty much every aspect of photography. Does it have a video use? Apologies, I'm not a Sony shooter, so not completely up on their tech. It absolutely has a video, a relevance in the world of video. Picture you're following a monkey and you're waiting for the monkey to jump off the branch to capture it in slow motion.
Yeah.
If anything, it's more important in video.
Of course.
It's harder to do in video. I'm not sure the A9 does it in video, does it?
It's a stills feature. And the A9 is an interesting product because it is it motion? Is it stills? Like, what is it? It's a real hybrid between those two genres of content creating, or sort of content capturing. It really does blur the lines, and because it blurs the lines, you're able to add that pre-capture thing, because effectively it's a video feature, isn't it? Going into a stills camera, which is really, really interesting. And whilst we're on that subject, talking about in any given genre of photography, so whilst this was being launched in Turkey, my colleague Sam Pilling, there was archers, and they were firing bows, firing archers, and Sam got a photo of an archer pulling back the bow and releasing the bow, and basically the arrow hasn't left the rope, but the rope is flat. So you imagine the arrow is firing off this way, rather than it being back here. So he's no longer got his finger on it. It's an incredible shot. You could not shoot that. You could shoot it, but you'd have to be very lucky. So if you shot on like the A1 at 30 frames per second, you get one chance of doing that. One of the times of doing it or repeating that process, you're probably going to get a hit.
I was also at that luxury event to try to get this same shot, and I think I got close to it. And as you say, you would have to be incredibly lucky. The fact that me and Sam, managed to get it, I'm pretty sure his would be better than mine. But we both got the kind of shot,
which is
just
incredible.
shows how much that's going to up the hit rate, right?
Yeah, and internally we're calling it like the impossible shot, and it's a list of shots that you just can't do otherwise, or unless you're very, very, very lucky. To do that with an A1 is a very capable camera. This isn't putting it down in any way. You're talking fractions of seconds, so you'd have to go through that process a few times doing the same thing, and eventually you'd get one or two, whereas two people using the same camera have been able to do it without any given kind of training around it. So it shows the probability is drastically reduced because the technology is so good. Just moving on to the next slide for me is why you would use Sony cameras for wildlife photography. So just a few headline bullet points. Affordable, in terms of like our long range lenses to what they have traditionally been. Some of them are really, really, really expensive. Ours comparatively are much more affordable. There's also options within that with APS-C sensors, APS-C lenses, and also full frame lenses. So there are options inside it. A really great lens that I like to talk about quite often is this one here, which is an APS-C sensor, and this basically is a 70 to 350mm great lens. So if you're starting out as a wildlife photographer and you want a load out that's going to give you the ability to get a bit of range, that's not going to break the bank, this and a 6700 is a great setup. It's going to give you a lot of options. You can really start producing some great work. Look,
and the higher f-stop when you're at that long range makes a lot less of a difference.
Yes.
You're still at f11 or whatever going to get very shallow depth of field, and you're going to get that blurred background behind the bird. It's going to limit you to daylight often rather than nighttime and stuff. There's certainly benefits of the brighter aperture, but that's more to do with light capture than it is to do with bokeh.
Yeah, and that's about understanding your exposure triangle. You know, how are you going to use it on the day? Is it a bright sunny day where you can go to f11 and still get good exposure, or is it a dark day where you're going to struggle to do that? So you kind of have to use the right tools for it. But also as well, if you were to take that lens and stick it on a full frame sensor, you get crop factor as well. You can still crop in as well. So there's loads of things you can do with it, and it's a very affordable lens. So,
and even on the higher end lenses, you're right, they are more affordable. On the new 300mm, which is the newest lens, it's 5,800 ink val, which I mean, obviously is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, but comparably for products of that same spec, given
they're often like 12 grand.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, you know, I think it's a great thing to talk about. You know, in terms of the affordability, easy to use. We touched on this earlier. You know, Jeff down at the lake was using a piece of kit that someone professional would use as well. So super easy to use, feature rich. We're seeing a lot of these features going across the different cameras, which is brilliant. And then high quality. You know, high quality content. Like, you're not sacrificing the quality that you are producing. So one of my favourite cameras at the minute is like the A7CR again. You know, sort of one of the higher end ones. But this is basically a 61 megapixel hybrid camera that's been squashed down but still has 61 megapixels. So if you are that wildlife photographer and you use, you know, long range lenses with cropping, but you don't want to carry loads of kit with you or loads of heavy kit, the A7CR is a great option for you because you're not sacrificing on megapixels.
Let's have a look at that slide of cameras.
There we go.
It's the next one, because I mean, this is so Sony. The amount of cameras you guys have.
There are a lot of cameras there. Not all
Lots of these here are not the current generation, right?
Yeah, correct. So some of them are now sort of like phasing out, but a lot of them are correct. So the ones in there that, you know, the A1, the A9 Mark III, the A7R5, the A7 Mark IV, and then obviously the 6700, and then the hybrid range, so the 7CR, 7C Mark II, and the 7C2. So yeah, there's a few in there. The ones for the top end wildlife photographers would be the A1, the A9 Mark III, and the A7R Mark V. Those ones would be the go-to in that given field. If you was looking for an all-rounder, I would say like the A7 Mark IV would be great for that. You know, still has 10 frames per second, which is similar to the R5, which is still very, very, very capable. And then obviously you then move into the APS-C stuff, which is the bottom line. So you can see we spoke about the 6700. So there's a great option there. So more affordable. So that's kind of the lineup. And again, a lot of them really cross between all of them. So Jess, for instance, she uses the A7R Mark V because she does.
I was going to say the R Mark V is surprisingly capable. That's normally, go back to the Mark Ones. Yeah. That would be the one that you would completely rule out
speed.
for
You
this.
just wouldn't touch it. Yeah,
that's the opposite of what that camera is designed for. It's 10 frames a second in 61 megapixels, which is bonkers.
Which is crazy. And I think it is totally bonkers. Like, it's a lot of data. It's a lot of data. And that's, if you then look at like the A1, that's a 50 frame sensor at 30 frames, a 50 megapixel sensor at 30 frames per second. Huge, all super capable cameras. So interesting lineup of kit. Now, one of the things we spoke about is like technologies that span between all of them. So the AI stuff is in our newer generation, and that's obviously because they need a newer sensor and processor to do it. There are autofocus technologies in some of the other ones, so like the A7 Mark III, the A7 Mark II. But in terms of their intelligence, comparably, they're not as intelligent, if that makes sense. But they're all the technologies.
The key. They're very good at autofocus. Well, they're not as good as autofocus, but they're good at autofocus. But they don't have the intelligence to know what subject is what, track the eyes, and track it. It's just classic autofocus point, set to that. Track that thing, please.
Exactly. So now would be a good time maybe to look at autofocus, autofocus.
Let's demo it.
Did anyone come up with a name for the bird? Have you got any suggestions?
No, any names for the bird. Come on, people.
No good. Come on.
George has put a question though and said, on the pre-capture, is there a frame and shot limit for the pre-capture? Like, for example, 24 or 30
it's done on
or
in
60?
a second, so it's done up to a second. So you can do like 0.10 of a second, 0.20 of a second, 30 of a second.
So it depends on your frames per second that you've got set, right?
Correct. Yeah. Correct. So you get a maximum time of 1 second, basically. So if you push that, say for instance, I'm panning across to you now, and I've got that switched on. If it takes me 2 seconds to do that. It's going to catch half of that process.
Sure.
So you want to get a little bit closer, so a little bit of timing with it. But yeah, so it's a second, or you can reduce that time. I would stick it on a second.
We have a bird name. It's Clarence.
Clarence.
Well done, George.
Let's go with Clarence. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to switch this on. So just so people know, in terms of our setup, I am using the A9 Mark III. I have got the 70-200 Mark II, it's 2.8, just because we've got a bit of range on there. I haven't got any of the bigger rangey lenses here because we're inside. Doesn't really make sense to...
What's the tall chap?
So this is our 200...
It's a 200.
Yeah, 200 to 600, great lens. Super affordable, like really affordable and great range. So I've got that one there. But yeah, inside, these are easier to demo, but we do obviously have 300, 400, 600, whole host of lenses.
That is affordable, isn't it? So that 200 to 600 is an f5.6 to x6.3 with image stabilization, and it's £1,558 ink VAT,
Which is incredible.
which is so that and a 6700. That's under the price of the A7R.
Yeah,
for
correct.
example.
And you've got range and a lens, and we spoke about earlier, shooting wildlife, distance is your friend, and you've got 600mm to play with.
Yeah.
If you wanted to go a little bit further than that, we'll talk about it in a minute, is you could add a 2x teleconverter as well and extend that out even further. So there's things you need to consider, which we'll discuss when we sort of give the demo. But yeah, it's really affordable comparatively, and 600mm is a fair bit of distance. You know,
that's good.
Traditionally, I'm a portrait photographer. I work at kind of 85 to 135. 600 is... I'm like, whoa, it's pretty incredible. So we're going to talk about the AI autofocus technology now. So in terms of setup, we've got this just plugged into a wireless transmitter. It's transmitting a signal, and we can show you. So I have to look at it on a separate screen. So one of the things you'll notice is as I pan my camera back and forth, this little box goes around the bird as I pan in. I'm not doing anything. I'm literally just scanning back and forth. I've got all the AI features switched on to identify a lot. I want to prioritise a bird over an animal, and I'll just show you that now in the menu system. So if I go down to my recognition, so I can change, I can do animals, birds, humans, insects. With the humans, I can even define if I want it to target the left or the right eye, to give you an example. But we're focusing on birds for the minute. So we've got that switched on, and what that's doing is the sensor is identifying the bird, the mass initially, and then the eye. I'm not doing anything yet. When I hold down the trigger button, it goes green. That tells me that's in focus. The camera's doing the hard work for me in terms of finding the subject and holding onto it. And if our bird takes a little flight, so it will track our bird, and as he moves in and around, he will stay relatively
Predictable.
It's fast.
Keep you on your toes.
Now, we appreciate we couldn't bring a real bird in here and do this, so this is a demo that we use quite
Imagine
often.
if we'd tried to.
Yeah, that's a whole different live stream. So yeah, you can see that the technology is incredible.
It just glues on it.
Yeah, it's holding on to it, and it will hold it. As soon as it comes back in, pop out of frame, back in, and you can see that. Now that's relying on, you know, the using these AI technologies to make sure that we can grab the subject, hold on to it. So an example of that now. That technology is available for a range of our, so the A9 Mark III, the 6700, the A7C Mark II, the A7 Mark IV. Yep. You know, that's in those cameras. So
that is the AI chip that is doing that. It's what's knowing that is the eye of the bird. It's identifying it that quickly, and it's responding that quickly.
Correct.
When we talk about whether they have an AI chip in, and that subject recognition, that is the real world.
That is exactly that, yeah, exactly. So, and again, it's nice to see that technology is across a range of products, not just in the high-end one, so you will get those. And again, 6,700 is a great entry point to have that and be wowed by that and super impressed. So when I was at Bird Fair, a woman had bought the 6,700, hadn't used it yet. She was like, I'm really looking forward to using it. Came back and she was like, I'm amazed. She was like, it just sticked onto the subject. She was so thrilled. So it's great to see that it's got that capacity. And then whilst we're on kind of doing the demos and setup, we've spoken a lot about shooting at range, so using our lenses to shoot at range. There's also macro, so people want to shoot insects and things like that. So I have got,
in fact, there's a sort of new breed of macro insect photography going around since lockdown of people doing insects in their sort of home environment and all the rest of it. It's incredible photography.
It's incredible. One of my favourite insect photographers is a guy called Levin Blisson, and I saw his exhibition once upon a time. And he basically does stacking. So he will take multiple images and then he will stack them all together. And what we mean by stacking is, rather than it being one image of an insect, and it's a taxidermist insect, it's not alive, so it's rather than it being one entire image, he will take, maybe 4 images of a given leg, 5 images of the thorax, 5 images of the abdomen, and he stitches them all together to become one main image. Takes a lot of work, but it's incredibly detailed. And
that's for focus and detail, because obviously at macro and that close, your focus plane, particularly if you've got to be in low light, is
very fine,
like tiny.
Yeah, so
tiny.
If you want it all to be sharp and then blow up on a big piece of artwork, you can't. It's very difficult to do that. So you have to do that stacking. So one of the things we've got here, so for the newer generation of wildlife, insect, fungi photographers that there are now out there, which is great. I mean. So we have a 200 to 70 to 200, so Mark II, and then we've got a 2x teleconverter on there as well. So with this, do bear with me, because everything that is magnified or seen at a range, any movement becomes massively exaggerated. So this is going to be wobbly. It's going to be a bit shaky. I'll try my hardest to...
Would you like clarence?
Yeah, if I can get clarence, that would be great. So bear this in mind, when you shoot at distance, if you're shooting at like 600mm or 500mm, you're going to want to do it on sticks, or you want somewhere that's really sturdy, because everything's amplified, and it's the same with magnification. So if we can find our bird, our starting point will be to get in focus initially. There we go. So we've got our bird in focus there. So I'm using manual rather than auto. It's just easier for me. I'm going to put a bit more light into the camera just so we can see it. So you can see here, and I can punch in, punch in, and punch in.
George says, I love that the name is sticking. It's because it's the only name we were given, George. It's a nice name, though.
If I come out, that's kind of my range there. So you can see here, now, as a macro photographer, if you were taking pictures of minute insects or fungi or anything along those lines, this is a great setup to have.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so a bit of perspective on this. This is not a quote-unquote macro lens, which is what I love about this. We've had fantastic macro lenses from pretty much every brand out there at the moment, but they're like a 90mm, super close focusing. Sony have got lots of them, they're great. But it's a lens in your bag. And if that's what you're doing, is going out to do that, then great. But quite often you just you see an opportunity or something like that. Yeah. And so for it to be built into a 70 to 200mm, which you're going to want to have in your bag anyway, because that's a super common lens.
Yeah, correct.
And you're probably going to want to have a 2x teleconverter in your bag anyway, because 100%. That's super useful.
And I think when we go back to looking at the hobbyist, when you're a hobbyist, you're in the greatest stage of photography ever. You want to shoot everything. You want to explore every avenue. Mm-hmm. Now, in order to do that, you need kit that's like broad, that can do everything.
Absolutely. So you can be taking portraits on the 24 to 70 to 200 one day, and then bugs in your garden the next.
Exactly that. So you want that kit to be able to do it, and then as you get further into your career, you find that you specify, you become a specialist in something, and then you need the specialist tools. So you're going to want to load out that gives you the ability to go from shooting portraiture to shooting insects in your garden, and that setup would allow you to do that, which I think is really great to have that, and again affordable comparatively to what else is available out there, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely.
So just another bit of an overview of kind of like some of the key comments here. We covered all of them kind of loosely in terms of conversation with a whole list of specs. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these. All of this information is freely available on the internet. We've kind of drilled into it a fair bit in terms of like megapixels and speed and all the rest of it. This is all accessible online. So if anyone wants to look at these comparatively, they can find that information out. But just kind of gives you a bit of a lineup. And then some of the newer stuff, so anything with a C are now kind of like our hybrid compact systems. They don't lose functionality, they're just more of a compact system. So for instance, if I use the this guy here, so this is the CR, so the A7CR,
this is the one that you said earlier was sort of your current
this is
pet favourite.
I thought I was not going to like it, and I went into it prepared not to like it, just because I was so in love with like the A7R Mark IV, the A7R Mark V. I was like, there's no way another camera is going to make me feel better about it than this. And super impressed by it. Really, really, really impressed by it. You know, it doesn't come short in terms of the megapixels, but look at it. That's 61 megapixels in a it's tiny. So again, we mentioned it earlier. If you were that wildlife photographer shooting on a 200 to 600 and you're still not close enough, you shoot on a 61 megapixel sensor, and then you can crop in, and you're still going to be really sharp. You know, which is great to have.
It's another 2x teleconverter, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And also within the camera itself, you can also have a digital magnification, which you can add in. So you can have up to times 10 digital magnification as well. So you either do the lens does the work and the cropping does it, or you can zoom in digitally. You do have to be aware that as you zoom in digitally, just like on any screen, you know, you'll start to get closer and closer to the pixels, no matter how dense they are. So it's worth bearing that in mind.
Absolutely. Couple of, while we've got that screen up, Liam just mentioned on the pre-shooting thing, it's an incredible feature to have for wildlife. There's been so many occasions where he sat for hours for a moment to happen and then missed the shot, which just must be the worst feeling in the world. I think everyone's done it though. George says tons of autofocus recognition options, and he's absolutely right. You come from any of the other brands, that screen where you see all the different options, like insects is on there and stuff. That's definitely a step up for Sony. On people, can you swap eyes on the fly, or do you have to change it by the menu?
You change it by the menu, but what you can do with that is if you want to change it by the fly, you just set yourself up a C1 configuration button. So if you want to quickly access the option that allows you to change from left to right, program it to C1 to C2, you hit that button, and then you can switch between the two. Yeah. So you can do it, or you can stick it into auto, and then what it will do is it will look for the eye closest to camera.
Which is what I have mine set in most of
or
the time.
the eye that has most visibility that isn't obscured. So as they turn in, it's not still trying to track the eye on the other side of the face. But it rarely happens. The AI is so good.
Gets it right a lot of the time, right?
It's really incredible. Yeah.
George says, question for Luke, what does your dream wildlife loadout look like? I appreciate you're more of a portrait photographer. But yeah, if you yourself were picking.
If I was picking, and from trying all of these bits of kit, my dream loadout would be, and this is a dream loadout, I mean, I'd have to sell a house and a kidney to be there. So I would say A9 Mark III I would go for.
Okay.
Because the speed is just uncomparable. I mean, and we're talking about hit rates. It's really. I worked as a professional photographer for a long time, and the thing I realised is if you want to earn more money as a professional photographer or be better at it, you just have to do the same thing quicker. If you can do it quicker, you can do more of it, and you can earn more money and in the right time. So I was always like, okay, right, how do I keep the quality and repeat that process as quick as possible? So an A9 would facilitate doing that, definitely. So I would say A9 Mark III, the 300 2.8 with a 2x teleconverter. That would be in my bag, and I'd probably just rock that. That would be like my go-to. I've got potentially up to 600mm range, you know, shooting at 2.
And the 300 is really lightweight as well.
Super light.
For a lens like that.
I quite like going hiking and walking and things like that. You know, you've got the option to shoot stuff relatively close, relatively afar. Just gives you a lot of flexibility. Of course, there's the swapping over and adding teleconverter on and things like that. That's a nuance that I deal with if I was choosing like my perfect setup. But that would be mine for sure. It's tempting because the portrait photographer in me would want to go for like the R Mark V to have the resolution to play with it and stuff like that. But again, through working as a photographer, like the more resolution, the more data. You just got more information you got to manage. You got to find somewhere to keep it. You got to do all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I think reducing that resolution also reduces like the bulk of the workload, in my opinion.
Sure. And I also know that you're really into your sports as well. A9 Mark III, even that low resolution for sports is great because of exactly that. You end up with a lot more images in sports.
Exactly. Well, I'd done Wimbledon last month? Yeah, so Wimbledon last month sort of thing. And speaking to a lot of the press photographers there, and a lot of them are combination again between the A1 and the A9 Mark III. And the trade-off between the A9 Mark III over the A1 is largely not because of the speed, it's because of the file sizes. It's like, okay, this is so much easier to...
It doesn't feel good putting your camera into medium quality or whatever, does it?
No. Yeah, you feel like, oh God, I'm kind of capping myself here sort of thing. So yeah, a lot of them are going A9 Mark III because the files are good enough to be used, you know, socially, online and in print. I think we're a little bit spoiled for choice. Like, 24 megapixels is still a lot of information to deal with. Like, it's still a great quality image that can be blown up and used in lots of given occasions. Where it wouldn't be so robust would be if you're doing loads of heavy editing and you're doing loads of retouching and adding stuff to the file. That's where you're not going to do it. But sports photographers that are documenting are not doing that. The image needs to be shot. The photographers are good enough to get a lot right in camera. Goes off to an editor and then done.
To counteract that, the A1, what leans me more slightly towards that is the sensor and the images out of it. There is something which I haven't seen replicated on the other Sony cameras. The just something about the sensors, the quality that's coming out of that sensor is stunning. It's really, really lovely. It's amazingly. I remember one of the things that amazed me most about the A1 when I started, which I didn't expect, because you read the spec, you expect it to be very fast, you expect it to be very detailed. How good the low light was, I did not expect. I thought it would be really quite bad in low light.
Well, you take a sensor, you add more megapixels, you lose its ability to take in light. So that's why, like the S3, for instance, is 12 megapixels. But the
A1's almost as good. It's really, really very good.
Yeah. Which again, as a wildlife photographer, you're not always shooting in perfect conditions.
Absolutely.
The thing that I realise as well with the wildlife photographers is a lot of what they shoot is obscured. It's through tree lines, it's through stuff, it's heavily covered, so you're not getting the benefit of that really bright open sky sort of thing. So they have to factor that in as well. So again, having that sensor is sort of pivotal to the success that they have. So yeah,
absolutely.
It's a tough one. It's called the A1 for a reason. I think it's going to be a good camera for a very long time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very, very, very long time.
Cool. Shabab has come back saying, do you recommend using S-Cinetone over S-Log 3 for wildlife if someone doesn't want to bother with grading and editing as much as possible? Do you have an answer for that?
Do I have an answer to that? Now, I'm not a colorist or massive in terms of like color science and things like that. So I would say the newer generations of our cameras, the profiles coming out of them are pretty impressive. Like they're really impressive comparative to sort of what they was historically, but that's understandable. Technology gets better, you refine stuff, you do it. I personally would just shoot in a standard profile for me. I'd shoot in a standard profile in RAW and then do my edits and stuff. If it was for video, then of course I would shoot in a flat log, and then it would go to a colorist or someone with way more experience than I have to be able to kind of make it to come to life. So yeah, I would be happy shooting in RAW and just a standard profile and then tweaking beyond that.
So from a more video point of view, then I absolutely would recommend S-Cinetone for that kind of quick turnaround. Thinking about wildlife specifically, because everything is so fast and everything is often against uncontrolled skies and, like you were saying, through obscured and in the darkness. Dynamic range is really important in wildlife situations, and so S-Log 3 I would be choosing over S-Cinetone in a lot of situations because of that.
And for people that don't understand, it's because you're just capturing as much information as possibly available, and then you can decide to clip it rather than letting the camera make a decision on clipping it for you. So you kind of got that bandwidth to playing around in that colour space.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, I would say absolutely try S-Cinetone, but as long as you're not trying to achieve the absolute pinnacle of image quality all the time. If you're looking for that middle ground, yes. Wazim also says, hello everyone, how was the new camera, the PXW Z200? I know that's... have you even played with it? That's not your area of Sony, right?
Not my area, unfortunately. Yeah, not my area, so I've not had a chance to play with it, but if you...
I have, yes. I've done a video on that. It's a brilliant camera. It's very, very impressive. And I think it's something that collectively the industry's breathed a sigh of relief. We've been waiting a long time for Sony to release a fixed lens camcorder like that, and Sony are kind of the brand for fixed lens camcorders like that historically. That has been their market for far longer than a lot of the other brands out there. And it's good. It's really good. It's got all this AI thing that we were talking about. It's got a few other features inherited from the ZV line,
which you wouldn't expect, like the AI stuff. You wouldn't expect in a camera like that, because that's a heavy operator system. That's kind of like the person that's picking it up and using that is someone who's got years and years and years of experience and is doing things in manual and doing everything You know, the old school words would say doing it all the proper way, sort of thing. Like, you know, that's so you wouldn't expect to have those AI features in there, but to have that, it's great. Why would you not want your life to be made easier?
Absolutely, and a lot of the situations that a camera like that is used in are very fast. So having anything like that is a thing. In fact, I actually one of my main criticisms of the camera was that although it's got that AI tech inside, the subject recognition menu, like the one you brought up in the A9, isn't a page long. It's only 2. It's humans and animals, I think, and that's it. If it actually opened that up to planes, trains, birds, insects, I think would be really relevant. You can see that camera used a lot for, or cameras like that used a lot for all kinds of documentary projects. Like, it sounds silly, but people that make content about trains, you know, and they're train spotters, and that's what they do, is they make documentaries on trains. And
can you name
brilliant.
another camera that has a
wildlife.
feature specific to train spotting, or like also, it's just such an obscure kind of thing to do, but it does show the capabilities of AI, and it does show like our embracing of AI and things like that, and whether we like it or not. And I think there's a big fear in the photographic and video world around AI and what it does in terms of its displacement and stuff.
I mean, that's a good point. AI, in terms of the fears that people have, is more about generative AI.
Yeah.
This is not generative AI. Nothing that a Sony camera does in it is generative
It's good to
AI.
know.
It's machine learning, and machine learning has been around for a lot longer than we've been talking about this AI chip. I think that the main thing, the difference that has happened very recently, isn't that machine learning has been added. If a camera's got any sort of object tracking, which they all have had my entire career, it's got machine learning in it. The difference is that hardware, the special processor chip inside that is only for processing the AI stuff, because that speeds it all up incredibly. Really makes a difference.
Good.
George says, I feel like the PXW Z200 would be too powerful for video with all those settings. No, just unleash it. Andrea says, we need a Sony A7000, which is an interesting one. Be interesting to know what you think of what an A7000 would be. I guess you mean like even faster frames a second, but in APS-C, like 20 and 30 frames a second, high-end
I guess
APS-C?
like a APS-C global shutter kind of, I guess like a premium APS-C sort of sense thing.
It would be great. Is that what you mean, Andrea? Let me know.
On those subjects, obviously, I'm not in a position to speculate or anything like that, add to the rumour mill, but there are plenty of websites where people will talk about what they dream of a manufacturer to come to market with, sort of thing. You know, I would say if you look at what we have, our current lineup is really relevant, and it's going to be really relevant for a long time. You know, the A1 is still a very powerful piece of kit. The A9's just come to market, global shutter. That's a very, very, very powerful bit of kit. So I think it's a bit premature to be like getting excited about newer product. Like we have, you know, we spoke about earlier, we have the pinnacle of camera technology right here, right now, sort of thing. Enjoy it.
Absolutely. Wasim's just come back on the Z200. I'm going to move on. This is the last thing I'm going to say about the Z200, because this is not the right stream for it at all.
But we do appreciate all the interactions.
Absolutely. Wasim says, thank you for discussing my question. Can we compare this new camera with the older models, and what about the new camera if it is used for a long time, about 5 hours of continuous recording in 4K format? Very simply, it's far better than every single older camera. Even I think the Z280, although they're going to release higher end Z280s, I imagine they said that this is not a Z280 replacement. Right now, this is the best Sony technology in a fixed lens camcorder, and 5 hours continuous in 4K, as long as you've got the storage space for it, the camera can do it. You know, that's what this kind of camera is designed for.
Love that.
Absolutely. Right, let's move on to wildlife.
Cool. Yeah, back to the wildlife. So last little bit is just like kind of our lineup of lenses and stuff like that. So we've spoken a lot about the long range lenses. So if you look at the bottom line here, these are what we call our telezoom and super telezoom with range. So these are our G Master ones. So these are the top end of range. So for instance, we have the 70-200 there. We have the 70-200 Mark II, which is what we have here, which is this one here. So we have the Mark I, Mark II. Mark II is significantly lighter. Technologies in and around the focusing is what allows us to do that. So rather than using a spring system, we're now using a magnetic system, which makes it considerably lighter. And you're seeing that a lot more on our lenses now. This magnetic kind of focusing system allows us to drastically reduce the weight, which when we're talking about wildlife is really important. You know, you want to be carrying around a light kit. And that was really the interesting thing I picked up from the bird fair, is a lot of these hobbyists, they tend to be a little bit older. The demographic is older, so then they have to consider their general health and, you know, trekking up a hill in Costa Rica. They don't want to be doing it with kilos upon kilos of their back. So this mirrorless kind of, you know, a lot of them move from DSLRs into this mirrorless thing, and they're like, oh my god, this is, you know, such a great moment for me.
Of
because
course, yeah.
it's,
Yeah, I mean the larger Nikon and the Canon like 1DX kind of style bodies. I know we should bring up Canon and Nikon on the same stream, but they are significantly bigger and heavier.
And yeah, a lot of these hobbyists,
these
they
kind
are
of cameras.
of an older generation, so they really appreciate the lenses and the bodies being lighter. So a few examples of them there. We also have, you know, the 300 we spoke about, really incredible lens, a 400 and a 600 as well. So you would see those like press photographers, wildlife photographers. So those are the ones that we've spoken about. It's just worth touching them. Then we have our G range. So in terms of like affordability, again, even more affordable comparatively to other stuff. So we have a 200 to 6, the 70 to 200. And then we also have a 7200 macro, which has a dedicated macro feature on there as well. And again, these ones are great if you combine those with the 2x teleconverter in manual focus. You can then create that really cool macro effect, which is cool. And that kind of gives us a roundup of.
And this is an important slide to come back to every now and again, because new lenses are being released all the time. If you just go back one to the G Masters, one of the main criticisms of Sony when the first A9 came out and was being talked about for wildlife, yeah, sure, but the lenses aren't there. You know, this is an industry that is all about the lenses. You now have your 100 to 400, which is absolute critical lens for that kind of work. You have a 300, a 400, and a 600. So there's not much missing compared to the more established and older brands.
And I think off the top of my head,
200. You haven't got a 200?
I haven't got a 200, a dedicated 200, but then you would argue you would take a 70 to 200, wouldn't you? Particularly when it shoots at f2.8. So if you're 2.8, 70 to 200 all the way through, you'd say, well, I'd take the 70 to 200, which is, you know, so there would be the counter argument there. So yeah.
Also, it's not really used in wildlife. It's more of a sports lens.
Yeah,
200.
Correct. And I think the other one is what I think. 73 or 74. I'll have to double check the numbers, but in terms of lenses, like we've really made up some ground in terms of having, and not just. So some real specialist bits of kit in there. So dedicated for video, dedicated for television. Like you wouldn't.
Do any of them have a built-in teleconverter?
None of them have a built-in teleconverter, no. So it would need a different. And we have two options with that. So there's a 1.4 and there's a 2x. So it's worth bearing in mind when you add either one of those on, you do lose light. Yeah, so you have to factor it in. So if you're shooting at, for instance, this guy here, the 200 to 600, that is 5.6 to 6.3. At the lower end at 5.3, if you added 2x on there, you're probably going to be back up to the 6.3. You're losing, sort of over a stop.
I think it's 1.5 stops for the 1.5. No, is it more?
Yeah,
how much stops? One stop and then two stops, maybe.
Yeah. So it's worth bearing that in mind, that you will lose a little bit. And that's why when you go back to my question about the ideal loadout, the 300 2.8, add in a 2x teleconverter, you're still shooting at a really good distance, and you're using the distance to allow the background to fall off as well.
One stop, two stops. Okay. 1.4 is one stop, 2x are two stops.
Nice.
Okay, let's finish on George's question. Thanks once again, George, for the questions. But he says, question for you both. What is your favourite Sony lens for wildlife?
Favourite Sony lens for wildlife? So in terms of like the feedback that I've gathered and speaking to people, it's this one here. The 200 to 600 is that thing. Everyone has that in their kit. So every wildlife photographer I've spoken to, they have that lens in their kit, and they say simply, it's got great range on it. Quality of the images are coming off the back of it are superb, and it's affordable. It's like there isn't another lens out there that does that, And I think if you are considering moving into this realm and getting into this, that is a lens that should be high up on your list of owning to have in your kit, because it just facilitates so much. So
I'm going to split this a little bit.
Okay.
If I was going to buy one, it would be that one. Yeah. Because it's such a good price for what it does, and it is so flexible with the range. If I was going to pick a favourite, that new 300, because it's quite light and the quality out of it, f2.8 at 300 millimeters is beautiful.
Yeah.
Chuck a 2x teleconverter on that, or just have the two teleconverters in your bag.
Yeah.
It is so useful. depending on which situation you're in.
Yeah.
I'd sit in a hide with that all day long.
Oh, 100%, yeah. And I'd trek to a high, you know, you take...
Yeah, exactly. And you're not going to break your back getting there.
Yeah, exactly. I'm kind of like, I'm looking forward to that process rather than being like, oh, you know, gonna break my back getting there.
Absolutely. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up?
No, I think we kind of covered a fair bit. You know, we sort of talked about the range, the different lenses that are available now. You know, and I said all this stuff is freely available on the internet. And yeah, I highly encourage anyone that watches this, if they've got any other technical questions, like reach out to you guys, because you guys know. And again, you've got Liam in house. Like, the guy knows his stuff, so he can answer any of these specific wildlife stuff. And you know, you've dabbled in it as well. So no, for me, I think we've achieved what we set out to do today. Yeah, it's been nice.
Yeah, fantastic. Right, thank you so much for your time. As always, pleasure to chat. And thank you all for watching. If you want to, of course, purchase any of this stuff, just get in touch with us at ProAV. Thank you for all your questions. See you very soon. Bye.
Lamb funk.